Adrian Cole had always been a man of discipline. He liked order, symmetry, and efficiency. To him, life was a problem to be solved, a system to be streamlined, an endless series of deadlines to be conquered. At 35, he had built Cole Tech Solutions into one of the fastest-growing software firms in the city. His colleagues admired him, his competitors feared him, and his employees respected him. Respect tinged with fear, perhaps, but Adrian had never minded that. Fear kept people sharp, kept them from growing complacent. His mornings were always the same: a 5 a.m. wake-up, a workout that left him dripping with sweat and clarity, a shower cold enough to shock him awake, and a black coffee, no sugar. By the time he walked into the gleaming glass headquarters, most of his staff were still dragging themselves in from commutes and bleary breakfasts. He liked being there first, as though the empire were his alone before the world arrived to claim it. But that morning, something felt different. When he stepped into the boardroom, the long oval table was already half filled with department heads and managers, murmuring over the launch strategy for their newest project, Nexus, an ambitious AI-driven platform that promised to outpace every competitor on the market. Adrian had pushed the team hard on this one, too hard, perhaps, if the dark circles under their eyes were anything to judge by. He adjusted his cufflinks, slid into the chair at the head of the table, and listened. The managers traded cautious words, debating timelines, staffing, risks. Adrian didn't bother intervening. He knew what he wanted: launch in 3 months with a full suite of features, and damn the cost. That was how you won. Then a voice cut through the polite hum. "With respect, Mr. Cole," it said, firm, unshaken, "this timeline is reckless." Adrian's eyes flicked up. The speaker was a woman he knew only in passing, Elena Marlowe, project manager for one of the core teams. She wasn't the most senior in the room, nor the loudest, but in that moment, she commanded attention. Elena sat straight-backed, her brown hair pinned neatly, though a few strands had escaped to brush against her cheek. Her eyes, sharp, intelligent, and unflinching, met his without hesitation. She wasn't flustered by the silence that followed, the way half the room turned to stare at her as though she had committed career suicide. Adrian tilted his head. Curiosity piqued. "Reckless?" "Yes," she said, steady. "If we push for 3 months with the scope you're asking, we'll burn out the staff and sacrifice quality. You'll have a flashy launch, but the system will be unstable. Users won't forgive us for that. And neither will investors when bugs cripple the platform." A murmur rippled through the table. No one challenged Adrian so openly. He folded his hands, studying her. "So, you're suggesting I abandon innovation for safety?" "I'm suggesting you abandon vanity for strategy," Elena countered. Her words were crisp, not cruel, but they landed with the precision of a blade. A staggered rollout. Launch the core system strong, then expand features in updates. That way, we build trust instead of hype that fizzles. The silence that followed was heavy. Adrian could feel his managers holding their breath. And yet, instead of anger, a slow smile tugged at his mouth. He leaned back in his chair, deliberately relaxed. "Noted," he said simply. "We'll revisit your proposal." The meeting continued, but Adrian found himself watching Elena. She wasn't cowed by the exchange. She jotted down notes, adjusted her papers, contributed to other discussions with calm authority. She didn't fidget or glance his way nervously, the way most did after daring to contradict him. No, she had spoken her mind, stood her ground, and moved on. Adrian wasn't used to that, and it made her unforgettable. The meeting ended in the usual shuffle of laptops and papers. Managers filed out quickly, murmuring congratulations or apologies, depending on which way the winds had blown. Adrian gathered his notes, but his eyes strayed to the far end of the room where Elena was slipping her files into a leather satchel. For just a moment, her brow furrowed, as though she were replaying the exchange in her head, but then she shook it off, squared her shoulders, and walked out with measured steps. Adrian remained seated, fingers tapping lightly against the polished wood of the table. Interesting, he thought. Very interesting. The day blurred on in meetings, calls, and strategy sessions, but every so often, Elena's voice echoed in Adrian's mind. Abandon vanity for strategy. No one had ever called him vain to his face, and yet she hadn't been entirely wrong. That evening, after the office thinned out, Adrian found himself standing by his floor-to-ceiling window, the city spread in lights below. He rarely thought about his employees beyond their productivity, their results, but Elena Marlowe had unsettled something in him. Was it defiance, intelligence, or the sheer audacity to look at him, Adrian Cole, and see not a CEO to be flattered, but a man whose decisions could be challenged? Whatever it was, Adrian realized one thing with unsettling clarity. He wanted to see it again. The weeks after the boardroom clash were a whirlwind of deadlines and shifting schedules. Adrian Cole had never been more relentless, but to his quiet fascination, neither had Elena Marlowe. She was everywhere, leading sprint reviews, smoothing conflicts between developers, pushing back against unrealistic expectations with calm but unwavering resolve. If Adrian was fire, she was steel, tempered, resilient, unyielding. The other managers noticed too. Some admired her, others bristled. Adrian had built a culture where few dared to question him, and Elena's rise disrupted the delicate hierarchy. Still, he let her speak freely in meetings, often nodding as though her arguments had already crossed his mind. It was unusual for him, his lieutenants noticed, but none dared comment. What they didn't know was that Adrian found himself watching her. Not in the predatory way of a man who thought power entitled him to anything, but in the careful, reluctant way of someone who knew better yet couldn't help himself. The tilt of her head when she focused on a problem, the measured tone she used to diffuse tense discussions, even the faint lines of concentration at her brow when she stared at code, these details stayed with him long after the workday ended. And then there were the late nights. One Tuesday, the office was nearly deserted by 9 p.m. The hum of computers was the only sound, the usual chatter and clatter replaced by the quiet intensity of those too stubborn to go home. Adrian was still at his desk, tie loosened, a rare state of disarray. He glanced down through the glass wall of his office, across the open-plan floor, and there she was, Elena, typing furiously at her dual monitors, her blazer draped over her chair. Her coffee mug, he'd noticed she always used the same chipped one, navy blue with a faded constellation print, sat half-empty beside her. Adrian checked the clock. 9:30. He should leave. But instead, he found himself walking downstairs. Elena didn't hear him at first. He leaned against the edge of her cubicle, arms crossed, watching her fingers fly over the keyboard. "You're still here," he said. She startled slightly, turning in her chair. "So are you." "I own the company," Adrian replied smoothly. "What's your excuse?" A faint smile tugged at her lips despite her exhaustion. "Someone has to make sure your impossible vision doesn't collapse on itself." Adrian chuckled, a sound so rare it startled even him. "Impossible? You wound me." "Not impossible," she corrected, swiveling to face him fully. "Just unsustainable. If we're going to build something revolutionary, it has to be sustainable." Their eyes held for a moment too long. Adrian felt a peculiar weight in his chest, the kind he usually only felt after a long run. Elena's gaze didn't waver, but there was something softer beneath the steel, something he hadn't seen before. Dangerous, he thought. She's dangerous. He cleared his throat, breaking the moment. "Go home, Elena. You'll burn yourself out." Her smile widened just slightly, a glint of mischief in her exhaustion. "Only if you promise to do the same." He smirked. Touché. Over the next few nights, it became a pattern. Adrian would work late, and more often than not, Elena would be there too. Sometimes they exchanged quick comments about bugs or timelines. Sometimes they sat in companionable silence, the air thick with unspoken things. One night, she ordered Chinese takeout for the whole skeleton crew. Adrian joined them at the long table in the break room, surprising everyone. He wasn't usually one to mingle, but Elena passed him a carton of noodles without hesitation, and somehow it felt natural. He caught her laughing at something one of the interns said, her head tilted back, her eyes bright despite the hour, and Adrian, who had built a fortress of discipline around himself, felt the first crack. He wanted to know what else could make her laugh like that. But it wasn't just late nights that tied them together. There were sparks in the day, too. Brief glances during meetings, arguments that left the air buzzing, silences that said more than words. And slowly, imperceptibly, the lines blurred. One evening, as she leaned over his desk to point at a bug report, her sleeve brushed against his hand. Neither moved for a second too long. Her perfume, something clean with a hint of citrus, lingered in the air. Adrian pulled back first, masking the slip with a brisk nod. Good work. But his pulse betrayed him. And as Elena walked away, she allowed herself one small, secret smile. For weeks, Adrian told himself the pull he felt toward Elena was nothing more than professional admiration. She was competent, assertive, intelligent. It made sense to value her input more than others. But the lie cracked the day Daniel Hayes stepped into focus. Daniel had been with Coltech almost as long as Elena. He was her teammate, her confidant, and from what Adrian could see, the one person who seemed to understand her rhythms without explanation. Where Adrian saw Elena as a challenge, Daniel saw her as a partner. Adrian noticed it first in the little things. Daniel bringing Elena her preferred chai latte in the mornings, Daniel leaning casually against her desk while she laughed at some shared joke, Daniel walking her out of the building after late shifts. And Adrian, stoic, disciplined Adrian, felt the unfamiliar coil of jealousy tighten in his chest. It all came to a head one morning when Adrian summoned Elena to his office to review the system update schedule. He had expected her to arrive alone. Instead, she walked in with Daniel by her side, both carrying stacks of files. "I only asked for Elena," Adrian said, his tone clipped, sharper than he intended. Daniel's easy smile didn't falter. "We work as a team?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "Then let her speak for the team." A silence fell. Elena glanced between them, brows furrowed. She set her files on Adrian's desk with deliberate calm. "Daniel's input is valuable. We've been solving a dependency issue together. If you'll give us 5 minutes, we can explain." Adrian leaned back in his chair, masking the sting with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "By all means." Daniel stepped forward, launching into an explanation filled with technical detail. Adrian heard the words, but his focus was on Elena. The way she occasionally nodded at Daniel's points, the way she smiled faintly at him in encouragement. It was the kind of smile Adrian had never earned. Something primal in him bristled. He had fought off competitors, hostile investors, entire market downturns. But the idea of competing with Daniel Hayes for Elena's attention was a battle he hadn't anticipated, and one he couldn't strategize his way out of. Later that afternoon, Adrian spotted them through the glass walls of the break room. Elena sat with her notebook open, Daniel leaning close as he pointed at something in her notes. She laughed, shaking her head, and for the first time in his life, Adrian nearly abandoned restraint. He wanted to storm in, to make his presence felt, to remind Daniel Hayes who signed his paycheck. Instead, he turned away, retreating to his office. His reflection in the window stared back at him, controlled, composed, but with eyes darker than usual. "Pull yourself together," he muttered. "She's an employee, nothing more." But he didn't believe it anymore. That night, the company held a small mixer at a rooftop bar downtown. Adrian rarely attended such events, but he wanted to see how the team celebrated the halfway milestone of the Nexus project. The rooftop was strung with lights, music pulsing softly in the background. Employees clustered in groups, drinks in hand, laughter cutting through the city noise. Adrian arrived late, as always, drawing subtle glances as he crossed the space. He offered polite nods, shook a few hands, but his eyes sought one person. He found her near the railing. Elena, hair loose around her shoulders for once, a glass of wine in hand. Daniel stood beside her, close enough that their arms nearly touched. Adrian's chest tightened. He approached slowly, and Elena's eyes lit up when she noticed him, something that eased the pressure in his lungs. "Mr. Cole," she greeted. "Elena," he said, his voice lower than intended. He gave Daniel the briefest nod. "Hayes." "Great party," Daniel said easily. "Nice to see you outside the office for once." Adrian's lips curved. "Don't get used to it." For a moment, the three of them stood together, the city glittering below. Elena sipped her wine, seemingly unaware of the quiet tension pulsing between the two men. Daniel broke it with a grin. "Elena, remember that Italian place I mentioned? We should go next week. You'd love it." Elena hesitated, her eyes flicking to Adrian for the briefest moment before she nodded. "Sure, sounds nice." Adrian's hand tightened around his glass, the stem threatening to snap. He forced himself to take a measured sip instead, every instinct screaming at him to say something, anything, to claim the ground Daniel had just taken. But he stayed silent. Because what could he say? Cancel dinner with him, have it with me instead? He was her boss. Even admitting the thought felt like crossing a line. Yet the rivalry was no longer subtle. It was alive, electric, and impossible to ignore. The evening ended with polite goodbyes. Adrian returned to his penthouse, staring at the skyline long after midnight. He tried to drown himself in work, in forecasts and expansion plans, but Elena's laugh with Daniel, Elena's smile at his jokes, haunted him. For the first time in years, Adrian Cole felt powerless, and he hated it. Deadlines had always been Adrian Cole's weapon. He wielded them like a general wielded swords, sharp and merciless. But deadlines could cut both ways, and Nexus was starting to bleed him dry. By the time the project entered its final month, the entire company was on edge. Developers snapped at each other in the hallways, designers worked until their eyes burned, and managers clutched their tablets like lifelines. The gleaming offices of Coltech had turned into a battlefield, and every soldier was on the brink. And at the center of it all, Elena Marlowe. She was tireless, though Adrian could see the strain in every movement of hers. The dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands sometimes trembled as she typed, the subtle hoarseness in her voice when she led meetings. Yet she never faltered. She carried her team forward with a quiet strength that left Adrian both awed and concerned. He told himself to keep his distance, but distance became impossible when the system collapsed. It happened at the worst possible time, 48 hours before the scheduled launch. The test servers crashed, wiping hours of work. A critical bug in the core AI caused it to spiral out of control, producing false data at lightning speed. Without a fix, the launch would be catastrophic. The office erupted into chaos. Adrian stood at the center of the storm, issuing orders, demanding updates. But it was Elena who steadied the panic. She gathered her developers, sketched emergency workflows on the whiteboard, reassigned tasks with ruthless clarity. "Daniel, patch the parser. Mia, rerun the data tests. We'll triangulate the root bug within the hour." Her voice cut through the noise, and people moved. Adrian watched her, an unfamiliar heat in his chest. She was magnificent under pressure, unflinching, commanding not by fear, but by sheer force of competence. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Most of the staff were sent home, but Adrian and Elena remained in his office, surrounded by reports and open laptops. The city outside was silent, but inside, tension hummed like an electric current. "This doesn't make sense," Adrian muttered, rubbing his temples. "The AI loop isn't closing where it should." "Then stop panicking and let me think," Elena shot back. Adrian froze. No one spoke to him like that. Not his managers, not his board, not even his competitors. But Elena, exhausted, hair falling loose from its bun, eyes blazing with determination, looked at him as though he were just another obstacle to overcome. And instead of anger, something else surged in him: admiration, desire. He leaned closer, scanning the same line of code she was pointing at. Their shoulders brushed, a spark jumping at the contact. "Adrian." His voice was lower now, rougher. She looked up, eyes locking with his. The air between them shifted, charged. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just the two of them. The hum of servers, the glow of screens, the quiet thrum of two hearts breaking rhythm. Adrian's hand twitched, aching to reach for her, to tuck that stray lock of hair behind her ear, to close the distance that had tormented him for weeks. "Adrian," he whispered again, closer this time. Her breath hitched. She didn't move away. And then, the door burst open. "I found it!" Daniel's voice rang out, shattering the fragile moment. He strode in, holding up a printed report. "The dependency chain. We missed a recursive call. That's what's crashing the system." Elena jerked back, clearing her throat, her cheeks flushed. Adrian straightened sharply, mask snapping back into place. Daniel didn't notice. He spread the report across the desk, pointing excitedly. "See? If we patch this and rerun the parser, the loop stabilizes. We can fix it before morning." Elena leaned over the file, relief washing over her features. "You're right. That's it." She looked up at Adrian, professional again. "We can make the launch." Adrian nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on her longer than it should have. "Do it." Daniel grinned, already pulling out his laptop. Elena focused on the numbers. The spell was broken, the moment gone. But Adrian knew the truth now. He was far deeper than he had ever intended. And no bug fix could save him from that. By dawn, the system was stable again. Exhausted cheers echoed through the office. Adrian congratulated his staff, praised Daniel's sharp catch, approved Elena's final workflows. But beneath the professional veneer, his mind replayed those seconds in his office. Her eyes on his, her breath catching, the almost kiss that might have changed everything. He wanted her, badly, and that terrified him more than any deadline. Coltech's Nexus platform went live without a hitch, the servers stable, the feedback glowing. Investors called with congratulations. Tech blogs hailed it as the next great innovation, and clients lined up for demos. To the outside world, Adrian Cole was untouchable, another victory added to his growing empire. The CEO who never faltered, never failed. But inside, he felt hollow. Every headline, every congratulatory handshake blurred together, because all he could think about was that night in his office. The way Elena had looked at him, the way his name had sounded on her lips, softer than it had ever had before. He had nearly kissed her. And God help him, he still wanted to. The company held a celebration in the main atrium, champagne flowing, laughter bouncing off glass walls. Adrian gave the customary speech, polished, sharp, full of gratitude, but his eyes found Elena in the crowd more than once. She stood with her team, smiling faintly, her glass untouched. Daniel hovered near her, protective, as always. Adrian's throat tightened. He ended the speech quickly, retreating to the balcony above the floor. Later, when most had gone home, Adrian found her there, alone, overlooking the city lights, the champagne flute still in her hand, though she hadn't drunk a drop. "You did it," she softly said. She turned, startled, then smiled faintly. "We did it. You pushed us harder than anyone thought possible, and somehow we survived." He stepped closer, his chest tightening with each word he wanted to say but couldn't. "You were extraordinary, Elena." Her gaze softened. "So were you." The silence stretched, filled with something heavier than words. "Elena," Adrian said finally, his voice low, strained, "I need to tell you something." Her shoulders tensed. "Adrian, I know it's wrong. You're my employee, I'm your boss. But every time I see you, He exhaled sharply, his control slipping. "I can't pretend anymore." Her lips parted, eyes wide. "Adrian?" He took one step closer, then another, until the city lights reflected in her eyes. "Tell me to stop, and I will. But if you feel even a fraction of what I do—" "Elena!" The voice shattered the moment. Daniel stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, but his jaw tight. He looked between them, understanding dawning instantly. Adrian's hand curled into a fist at his side. "Elena," Daniel said firmly, "we need to talk." The rivalry was no longer subtle. It was alive, raw, and unavoidable. The days that followed were suffocating. Elena avoided both men, burying herself in the aftermath of the launch. She worked late, but this time she kept her door closed. She answered emails with clipped efficiency. She smiled less, laughed rarely. Daniel cornered her first. In the quiet of the break room, he finally spoke what had been written in his eyes for years. "I've been in love with you since the first week we worked together," he confessed. "I kept waiting for the right time, but I can't wait anymore. Not when he's circling you like that." Elena froze, her heart pounding. "Daniel, you know me. You know I'd never hurt you, never risk your career, never—" He swallowed. "I'm not asking for an answer right now. Just think about it. Think about us." And he walked away, leaving her breathless and guilty. Later, Adrian found her in the stairwell, where she thought no one would look. "Elena," she turned sharply, "we can't do this." He stepped closer. "Can't or won't?" Her voice cracked. "Both. You're my boss. This could ruin everything I've worked for, everything you've built." He searched her face, seeing the conflict etched in every line. "Then say the word, and I'll let you go. I'll lock it all away. I'll never cross the line again." She closed her eyes, trembling. "That's just it. I don't want you to." The dam broke. Adrian reached for her, pulling her against him. And when their lips finally met, it wasn't gentle. It was weeks of restraint snapping, fire and hunger and surrender all at once. For a moment, the world fell away. No deadlines, no rivalries, no rules, just them. But when they parted, breathless, reality rushed back in. "We can't let anyone know," Elena whispered. Adrian nodded, his forehead resting against hers. "Then we don't, for now." Secrets never stayed secret for long at Coltech. Whispers began almost immediately. Employees noticed the way Adrian's eyes lingered on Elena during meetings, the way she returned to his office more often than before. Rumors trickled through the cubicles like smoke. Daniel kept his distance, but his gaze burned whenever he saw them together. He was polite in meetings, professional in emails, but cold. Elena felt the loss of his friendship like a knife. Meanwhile, Adrian struggled with restraint. He had spent years building a reputation as a ruthless, untouchable leader. But every time he brushed Elena's hand in passing, every time he caught her smiling privately at him, he felt that control slipping. And yet, despite the risks, neither of them stopped. Late nights turned into stolen kisses in darkened offices. Business trips became excuses for moments they couldn't have at home. For Adrian, it was the first time in years he had allowed himself vulnerability. For Elena, it was a terrifying, exhilarating plunge into something she knew could break her career. But her heart had already chosen. The rumors reached the board eventually. One morning, Adrian was called into a closed-door session with his directors. They asked pointed questions about favoritism, about professionalism. They didn't accuse him outright, but the warning was clear. Adrian emerged from the meeting with fire in his veins. He wouldn't let anyone tarnish Elena's name. That evening, he found her in his office. "We can't hide forever. If this comes out, they'll tear you apart, not me. And I won't let that happen." Her eyes filled with fear. "So what are you saying? We end it?" He shook his head, stepping close. "No. I'm saying we stop pretending. If I have to put my reputation, my position, everything I've built on the line, I will. Because you're worth it." Tears brimmed in her eyes. She reached up, cupping his face. "Adrian."
It wasn't easy. Daniel pulled back from her completely, their friendship a casualty. Gossip rippled, the board frowned, and work grew even more complicated. But slowly, the company adjusted. Elena proved herself again and again, not as Adrian's favorite, but as the brilliant manager she had always been. And Adrian, once the man of discipline, of walls and deadlines, learned that some risks were worth taking. Together, they built not just software, not just an empire, but something far rarer, a love born in fire, tested by rivalry, tempered by devotion. Deadlines still ruled their lives, but in the quiet hours after midnight, when the office was dark and the city stretched below, they had something stronger than ambition. They had each other. The end.